Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst and I will be chairing the meeting this morning. To my left is Mr. Brent McIntyre and to my far left is Mr. Robert Buss. The assessor this morning is Mr. Michael Taylor and our recording secretary is Ms. Kelsey Harrison. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicants may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decision. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible, and as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. The first matter on the docket this morning is 1512 Regent Avenue West.
Do you swear in or affirm? Could you please state your name?
Mike Taylor.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Could you please state your name? And do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Taylor, please proceed when ready.
First property we're hearing today is 1512 Regent Avenue West, file number 19-178, roll number 09007642500. 2 buildings on site, 8 units, years built being 7981. We have a plan area of 15,692 square feet. There's a basement area in one of the buildings of 8,520 square feet. Looking forward, we have rental comparables. Tried to stay in the neighboring area on Goonders and Regent Avenue. Looking for similar properties, being strip malls or restaurants. Rents there ranging from a low of $12.67 a square foot up to a high we see there at $36 a square foot. Moving forward to the next page, we see that we have 7,172 square feet of restaurant space. We're applying a rent of $21.14 a square foot to that. And then the rest is standard parameters we apply for valuations of restaurants. So 3% for vacancy, shortfall being 750 square foot, undercover expenses being 2%, and a capitalization rate today of 7.5% to get to $1,900,000. The following page has the neighborhood shopping center strip mall space and the valuation of that. So we see the basement's been lumped in at a rent of $3.65. All these rents again are model driven. Probably the remaining 6 units there that are on the main floor in around $12 and change. For neighborhood shopping centers, we've applied a vacancy rate of 4%, shortfall of $8, expenses at 2%, and the cap rate being 7.3%. The following page, we see The income value summary, just showing the two streams. But the vacancy rate blends out to 3.46% and the capitalization rate blends out to 7.41% to get to the rounded value of $3,515,000. So it shows we start off with a potential rent of $282,412,000. Moving forward to page 9, I guess we could take a quick look at page 8, just to get the bearings of the subject property there. We have this Moody's restaurant in the front, fronting Regent. In the back, we have that strip mall / neighborhood shopping center space there with the 6 commercial units there. Flipping forward to page 9 is the 2017 income expense questionnaire. I stated earlier that the combined potential rent with the modeled rent we used $282,412. They're reporting a rental income of $246,084. That being with a 9.5% vacancy on the space there. We just have the rest of their income expense and income statements there for 16 and 17. And then just behind that, we have the standard package of City of Winnipeg Assessment Taxation Department addenda. You guys have probably seen a million times. Welcome any questions on any of the payment presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newfield, do you have questions?
Yes, the workup page 3 and 4, does this all make the model?
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. And you've got 2 revenue streams, but can you confirm that this is one titled property and can't be sold separately?
Correct.
Have you had a chance to inspect?
Just drive-by inspection.
Those are my questions, thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boss.
What are the rents from the strip mall? They're showing on page. Page 11, I believe. Did you mention what they work out to, or?
No, I don't do the calculations of those if you'd like.
Say the first one, leased area, these.
That's the basement unit, the first one. Did you still want me to calculate that one?
Okay.
It's $4.
So these are semi-gross, or do you think they're full net leases?
It doesn't indicate on the mailer whether they're net or, doesn't have anything checked off, as you see there on my page 11, so I'm really not sure.
Okay.
It does show that the property taxes are almost fully recovered. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Nor do I. Mr. Newfield, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. So the property is was designed with a Smitty's up front and a strip mall style in the back with a full basement. It's actually earning rent on the basement, so we do include it in our valuation. And the thinking on this site was it was designed and built by the owner, who is the Smitty's franchisee, and as an afterthought, built a strip mall in the back. And that's what gives it most of its performance problems. The rent we've used is the actual rent, and we've stabilized this at a net value of $265, or almost $266,000. So after reading the statements, there are some non-recoverables in the leases. The mattress store has the highest amount of non-recoverables, but the statements, I guess, were provided by the assessor, and so you can go through them and see that in the financials that the recoveries don't match up with the expenditures. Now, when we looked at their summary statement on page, the assessor's page 9, I think I've got that in here somewhere. We decided not to use the NOI of 154,858 because on the expense side, there were a few expenses which may or may not have related to the restaurant operation. So we weren't sure about that, so we took a slightly different approach to it in terms of the expense load. Is we had known about the basement store being a semi-gross, and that's why we adjusted to 265 as the potential rent. The actual vacancy, 9.5%, which gives you an income of $247,28, which compares with their claim of $246,084, and the difference of $6,000 is the non-recoverables. As I am aware of it, specifically due to the more specifically due to the basement, although there are some of the other rents with non-recoverables. So that's how we ended up reaching pretty much the same position that the owner has claimed. Now, the rent applied to the Smitty's is $20, and it is an owner-occupied space, and that's the rent we used. And I don't know if we're very far apart on the owner's rent portion of it. 2114 is what the assessor's claiming, so I don't think that there's a major difference there. In this case, the non-recoverables are outlined in the statement. We've calculated them to be $22,894, and that would be the items that they've claimed for insurance, property management, professional fees, and I think there's another line item, caretakers' benefits, wages and benefits. Structural reserve, we put at 40 cents per square foot, and this has to do with the nature of a restaurant, which is far more expensive to allocate revenue for structural reserve due to the complexity of the HVAC system. Normally this range will be expressed as either as a rate per square foot or as a percentage. When it's expressed as a percentage, we typically see 2%, and when expressed as a rate per square foot, it can range from $15 to $1, sometimes even higher, depending on the type of property. When I do appraisal work, I prefer to use the rate per square foot because we can apply it directly to the operation. The percentage rate is generally used when you're dealing with a very large investment property with a very complex building, like say a shopping center, because it's too hard then just to make estimates on such a large, diverse operation. So the standardized replacement reserve is 2% on properties like that, and that's the rate that had been applied in the past. The non-recoverables, and I did skip past that, are a standardized amount of non-recoverables. We do have a report at the end of documents here, page 41 and forward, having to do with our estimates from our Colliers managed properties of non-recoverable expenses. These would include typically what we're seeing in there is a variety of management costs, professional fees, insurance are generally the large ones. And in some cases where there's tenant turnover, there are tenant improvements, commissions, and expenses related to repair of properties. And when we summarize this, we look at page 45 of my report, and the properties that are experiencing turnover will have non-recoverables that can hit 30% as that's shown. But when they stabilize out, properties without high turnover, they're stabilizing out at about 7%. And in the past, you've heard the story already, 5% for non-recoverables, 2% for replacement reserve. It's the same way we do it in real life. This is what we would have done. I have, this is from the assessment department, published June 28th, 2019, and I'm going to read it. The non-recoverable operating expenses are non-recoverable when they are the responsibility of the landlord, or the landlord cannot distribute them to the tenants due to vacancy. The landlord's expenses are typically for management and other expenses such as advertising, professional fees, and structural repairs. A standard allowance of 5% has been provided for management, and allowance of 2% has been given for other expenses. June 28th, 2019. Now, this is the assessor's evidence in an older case, but the point is that this was how it was done, and the standards of valuation haven't changed in 50 years and maybe 100 years. So the new concept of only allowing 2% is something that the city assessor is doing on his own, abruptly. As I stated, I'm an accredited appraiser. I also do appraisal work on the side for a variety of purposes, and we always include allowances for non-recoverables, replacement reserve, in addition to typical vacancy. So our NOI after that calculation is 210, and we're capping at 8.75, and a variety of reasons for that. Firstly, we do have some comparables and support at the end of our document. This property is likely one that Colliers would consider in the world of an investment property. It's on the cusp. What we don't like are restaurants. Had it not been a restaurant, we would have looked on page 26 at the strip mall cap rates ranging between 7 and 8%. But as a restaurant, the risk level is higher, and of course the restaurant is the predominant part of this shopping complex. Now, restaurants are a very risky business, and one of their competitors, if you've read the news, has recently shut down most of their operations. It's the nature of the business, and no investor in their right mind is going to put money into a sector of the restaurant business where the players are turning over. I'm very, very familiar with this sector, having taken over several restaurants, bankrupt restaurants in this style, and worked with them. It's not just simply not a good investment. It's a risky investment, which calls for 14 to 15% rates of return, because you're dealing with high risk. And that's what we don't like about this site. The other thing we don't like about this site is any income coming from a basement. The income is so marginal, under $4 a square foot, that most investors wouldn't even place any weight on it whatsoever, because it's like additional accessory income that could go, may stay. Reasons for it is it's retail on a lower level. That's not good retail. It's not barrier-free access. which means code problems. And $4 rent is not worth chasing when you're trying to chase $20 on the main floor. It's just accessory rent, so it's a very weak part of the component. So in the investment world, the alternative would be to strip that income out and ignore it and call it accessory income, and maybe you get it, maybe you don't, which changes our NOI down, and then our resultant cap rate can also decrease. But it's in place, so we're dealing with it in place. But my personal preference would be to take it out completely, which shows a decline of probably on a net basis of $23,000 on the NOI, putting it at $187,000, and then applying a cap rate that's lower than that, and you're gonna get the same number. And this is how we work this, calculated out this property. Thank you, and that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Do you have questions for Mr. Neufeld?
Just a few. So you put in the income expense questionnaire from 17 on your page 3?
That's correct.
You don't have the first page where they indicate the 9.5% vacancy.
Yeah, I've got it in my file, but we didn't include it.
Because you guys are using 9.5 vacancy for your calculation.
Right.
My question is just where they came up with that number, because they're only really recording on the rent roll on your page 3, the one space is being vacant, which only occupies 5% of the space.
No, they have 2 spaces, Buckboard Express vacant 7 months, and Spare Time Hobbies vacant entire period.
Okay, so you're...
So using pretty much 2/3 of one space and completely the other space.
Okay. And then this other unit here, unit 6, is also occupied by the owner, so we got quite a bit of space that's owner occupied here.
Oh, yes, that's correct. They have a unit in the strip. I believe that a few years ago that was a rent-paying user, and it became vacant, and they took it over because they couldn't find another tenant for it. It was Stop One Specialties 2 years ago, 3 years ago. When it went vacant, they couldn't put it back on the market, not a lot of interest on a small space at the back, so they're using it themselves.
Okay. And how do they work out what expenses they pay? Like they have a book rent, and how do they do the book expenses? How much they're paying, just by a percentage, or?
Well, yes, their calculation on their expense recovery on their statement is their own estimate, and that's why we didn't use it. The major semi-gross portion, of course, relates only to the strip mall. As far as the restaurant's operation, we didn't rely on those numbers.
Okay. And what was the actual vacancy at April 1, 2018? 9.5? So I know that's what they're reporting on 17 with the 5 months and then the whole year vacant on that one.
Well, Buckboard Express went vacant in April of 17. Spare Time Hobbies was vacant. So I would say that just looking at that, 9.57% as of April 1st.
Yeah, I know that's what they're reporting on this one page, but they also have their own owner-occupied space that they say they're gonna finish occupying at the end of 17 also. So my question was, what was the actual vacancy?
Yeah, it might be higher than that.
Maybe higher, might be lower, we don't know.
Well, no, like, I don't know if, like, I believe the thinking there is that they have 2 units side by side, 5 and 6, that they're prepared to vacate in case they get a larger tenant. So I haven't checked that.
Okay. And then, just one other question on, because you were talking about the basement at $4 and how that really doesn't have too much value. Just looking at your calculations here, we have the structural reserve of 40 cents a square foot, And then when you add up do you know what your vacancy cost per square foot and your non-recoverables per square foot would work out to?
Well, we're using 743, which was based on our reading of, well, we have a couple of the actuals, the taxes and the repair and maintenance, which we've adjusted, and for utilities, we're not using the statement numbers, because
Yeah, I know.
obviously the restaurant cost would be in there and they would throw it off, so we're using the city's business tax number for ease. So we're using 743 a square foot. And that might be slightly lower than what you're using, but, yeah, you're at 750 on one and,
But just when we add those
Eight
things in
on
with
the-
the $4, it ends up being what? What's the true net rent of that basement space?
well, that's the thing, the
Lumping
true,
all this extra
the
stuff.
true net rent of the basement is likely nothing.
Yeah,
And that's why, we have it included in income, but,
it ends, zeroes out in your calculation.
well, pretty much after you do your work through, we
Yeah.
put it in, we take it out.
Okay. That's it for my questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buss.
Thank you. Where is the basement? Is it in the Smitty's or is it?
No,
in
in strip mall in the back.
Where does your cap rate, on page 26, you're using 8.75, I'm wondering where that would fall in.
Well, as I said, in the strip mall side, we have a low and a high of between 7% and 8%, and that's what you should see for a strip mall.
Okay.
We don't consider this, as I said, to be a pure strip mall because of the restaurant component. We've adjusted upwards for that restaurant component and also for a revenue coming from basement. And as the assessor pointed out, it does end up being netting out to almost nothing for rent, but it's covering parts of the expenses. So you take it out and you're not covering part of the expenses anymore, so it's like a mortgage helper or whatever you wanna call it. Contribution to overhead is remote, that's what the technical word is. So we don't wanna put a lot of weight on basement income, and we have a higher risk for the restaurant.
Have any Smitty's restaurants closed down and that you know of in the
Oh,
last?
certainly, several, that have turned over internally, yes,
Turned over?
internally.
Like new franchisees is what you're talking about?
Franchisee goes bankrupt, gets taken over.
But the restaurant stays open?
Well, there've been a few movements and changes. Find a new investor who's gonna come in and reinvest some money and keep it going. They can continue onwards.
Has this one been renovated recently? I don't go to Smitty's very often, but it seems to me they don't change a lot.
I don't think it has, I'm just trying to remember, because I was in the one on, Pembina had some money put into it. Not this one, that I recall.
And on page 27, getting back to the cap rate, in the last line there, it says, all capitalization rates, et cetera, must be a return of investment that carries a mortgage.
Right.
Are you saying that the mortgage has an effect on the cap rate?
Well, the main reason we use the income approach is for mortgage financing, and it's to determine if the rent generated by a site can carry the mortgage to satisfy the bank and to satisfy the investor. So the bank is taking 65 to 70% of the value in financing it, and then the investors are working off their equity. So what you like to see is, first of all, the mortgage has to be covered, and secondly, there has to be a return on the equity investment. And that's the theory behind the income approach. That's why we use it. So the test there shows, for example, that the 5.4 is the minimum amount that a cap rate can be to carry a standard mortgage. And if you go as high as 8%, you can see that the return on equity is 8.73%. So that's when a property becomes of interest to an investor. If you're doing it on the income basis and you're gonna carry a mortgage and you want a return on your money, and you're targeting 8%, you need a minimum NOI of 8%. That's the reason for this calculation. Now, in this case, when we're looking at that 8% number, we know that restaurants go higher, not lower. And the number has to improve the NOI and the return on equity for a riskier investment. And the other thing is, it's a little more difficult to get mortgages for restaurant-based operators. So they could pay a penalty of 0.5 to 1% higher for being a restaurant, and therefore pushing your requirement for returns higher.
Okay.
Well, I've told you my stories of the restaurant world, and you know, the lowest cap we've ever seen in my lifetime there was like 13–14%, because there, and I managed to drive 8 of them bankrupt just by myself. Well, the market did it, but they are risky investments.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Mr. McIntyre.
I just have one question. So if they're risky investments, why is there a restaurant on every corner in this city?
Well, you must go to a meeting of restaurant operators and meet the egos and people involved. There's always somebody who thinks that this is a great business to get in. And in the early days, for example, we all know the Tim Hortons stories. Retired policemen loved to be Tim Hortons franchisees, because that was like, they enjoyed it, a coffee shop in their job, and they bought themselves a job in their retirement, they'd use their pensions, and it was a great thing for it. Not your typical motivation. The people who get into it are restaurateurs, they're not investors, and they want to sell their business. Now, when you have a good year, you have a really good year. And when you have a bad year, you're closed. It's that sort of an operation. Our favorite saying was, volume forgives all sins. But the model of a restaurant operation, if you have a good success, it carries forward. And you got a lot of slippage, a lot of I'm talking here. A lot of losses, internal losses, because you're dealing with the cash basis. But when things get bad, there's like a threshold of earnings, and in the old days, it used to be about $500,000 a year, and you could make money above that. Below that, you're closed within 2 months. The number's a bit higher these days on your break-evens. It's probably about 1.1, 1.2 million. And but like I say, they just attract the type of person who wants to be a restaurateur or run a bar. There's no real experience required. Everyone thinks they can cook. And some can, some can't.
Okay.
In Europe, for example, I'm gonna carry on forever until you tell me to shut up.
Maybe we will, just in the interest of time, it's a long
But
time getting you're the first person.
Here's a little bit. In Europe, for example, it's a profession. It's a very, they have training for it. And you can't become a waiter without taking a 3-year course. Well, in some places. In North America, it's like wide open. Want to open a restaurant? Yeah. Our favorite joke, how do you make $2 million in the restaurant business? You start with 10.
Thank you.
I've got lots of names of people who became millionaires that way.
Okay, and I do not have any questions at this point, so, do you have any,
No summation.
No summation, good, thank you. Okay then.
And I know you don't want to hear any more funny stories. Thank you.
All right, the next matter on the docket this morning is 1522 Regent Avenue. All right.
You guys all ready to go?
Sorry?
You guys all ready to go?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, so 1522 Regent Avenue West, file number is 19-1714, and the roll number is 0900764200. The proposed 2020 assessed value being $6,585,000. We have 2-year builds here. Essentially what we have on site here, he has a strip mall again, but not really fronting Regent, fronts the side street. And they just added a pad site restaurant in 2016. So the plan area shows 25,870. However, we have a leasable area today of 26,677, which comes directly from the rent roll. I have not looked further into why there's discrepancies between what the rent roll is, but that's why the number is different on page 1. Page 2 just shows they sent in a request for income and expense information, as well as my rental comparables there. Again, trying to stay in the local area for restaurants, strip malls, neighborhood shopping centers. Yeah, and those all ranging from a low of $12.50 up to a high of $22 a square feet. Flipping over to page, I think it's my page 4, let's see for you guys. Yeah, page 4 will be the valuation for the restaurant stream. So we have a modern rate of $36.72 a square foot. This is for the pad site fat burger that's there on site. Vacancy of 3%, just like we saw last time. Expenses of 2%, shortfall of $750. And this one, since it was just built in 2016, and it's 2,000 square feet, the cap rate of 6.35%. The next page, page 5. Again, it's more of a strip mall, but we're calling it a neighborhood shopping center and calling it that way today. So we see model driven rents that range from a low of $16.40 up to a high of $19.73 a square foot. And then 10 parameters for neighborhood shopping center again, 4% for vacancy, 2% for expenses, shortfall being $8, and a capitalization rate of 7.3% again. So page 6, we'll flip to that. It'll just show again the blended amounts and the total amount for potential rent being 507,603. The vacancy being blended out at 3.85%, and the cap rate being blended out at 7.14%. To get to that $6,585,000, you see below. Page 9 just shows the aerial photograph of the subject property there. So really what we have, there's the, on Rougeau there and Regent, essentially this was like all one property. They split it off a couple years ago. We have the winners that want to be on its own separate roll number, so they could appeal their own thing separate from the strip mall at the back. So we have the strip mall at the back there, and then they just added that pad site that you see there as the fat burger. Page 10. That is again just the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. Shows there was no vacancy on site. This first one on page 10 and 11, sorry it all comes together, so that was for the winners I was talking about earlier. Page 12 is for the strip mall and the fat burger and everything else. And so it shows their potential rent received is the $496,379. Again, 0% vacancy, 9 tenants there. And again, that 26,786 that I was talking about on page 1, that's where we get that from. Page 14 just has the rent roll for the subject property. Essentially what we have, similar to what we were saying before, lots of the model rents are reflecting what they're actually receiving on these. We go from a low of $16.75 for the fishing hole tenancy there, the third one down, up to the high of $35 a square foot for the fat burger, which is the top. But the rest of them are all around, if not higher than what the model is picking up. Generally ranging $18, $19 a square foot. And after the income and expense questionnaire, we just have that standard addendum package. For the city of Winnipeg again, don't need to go into it in detail unless you guys will ask me some questions about it after my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newfield, do you have questions?
Yes, I'm just trying to figure this out here. This is for the roll ending in 42,000.
Mm-hmm.
And page 9, the area identified as 42,000 is in purple at the top. Outlined in purple.
Yep.
And the property to the north, that's the winners?
That's the winners, yeah.
Okay, and what's that roll?
That roll number would be
Is that
the
41?
41,000.
Yeah, okay. So when I look at the statements and,
The problem is, I think that the owner put the information on flip ones.
Right.
And sent them both in together.
Right.
So that you would be penalized.
when in doubt, send everything.
Yeah.
So on page 11, where it's identified as 42,000, it has winners, but that's not in it. That's in 1520, correct?
Again, yeah, that would have been, the owner, or whoever filled out the expense questionnaires. It's Peshka Jane, the property accountant, on page 13.
Right.
I mean, he's the one who filled out both of them.
So page 14 is roll 42,000 then? So
Yep.
you just reverse these?
Yeah, you just flip them around.
Okay. As long as we're on the same page, I just wanted to check here.
Yeah, that's why I didn't edit it out and not include it, I just put what I
Right.
submitted in and.
So your work up here, page 4 and 5, which I assume then is all by the model,
Yep.
shows that there's the chain up front and then a strip in the back, and you segregated them, and the chain is that Fat Burger?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions, and if you don't mind, did you add, sorry, no, did you, page 14, since that's what we're dealing with, did you take a chance in adding up what that income was?
The income for which?
That they're showing for the appropriate role?
Well, that's on page 12, right?
Well, I'm not entirely sure about that, because if you go back to page 12, note that they're saying 496 in rent income, but they have an NOI of 570.
Yeah, that's after they're putting in the recoveries, but then deducting.
Yeah, but they have a higher NOI than rent, so I'm just wondering about whether or not they had winners' information was mixed in.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was just, wanted to go through the exercise of trying to read.
I did reach out to the guy who filled out, or the person that filled out
I just want to add up what they have here on page 14, that's all. And I wish I would have picked this up earlier instead of wasting your time here, but. Okay, yeah, it appears to be the right number on page 12. That's what we're dealing with their statement. With
496.
496, yes, 379.
Like I was saying before, though, I compared what they were reporting in their mailer on 14 to what the model picked up for rents, and it was all pretty close.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, so your model's at 507, and they're saying 496, so
Yeah.
we're $11,000 difference in the growth, in the potential rent.
Yeah.
Okay. I see the major discrepancy here is that they paid out $105,000 in property taxes, but they recovered $134,000. When did the replot occur?
I have no idea. I would guess it was prior to the Fatburger going on there, so it was before the 2016 reassessment.
Yeah, so it could have been a prior period adjustment from the replot that messed up their statements, that they didn't know how to deal with it, because they would have
I'm not
received
sure.
a credit on the winner's side.
Yeah.
And then a new assessment for the, okay. But
It was all one before.
I thought you might have the supplemental dates in your files, that's all.
Oh, no, that was the brief today.
Okay, thanks. You always make my work easier, I just thought you'd have it there.
Yeah, no.
Hey, Mr. Buss.
Your cap rates,
Yep.
could you explain where they come from, how you come to those rates?
Oh, well, the neighborhood shopping center one is pretty standard, that one's in the 28th percentile, so
Okay,
indicating it would be an average neighborhood shopping center, which, again, we've kind of talked about that it's more of a strip mall, but, regardless of that, the restaurant one, I touched on in my presentation, just that, being that it was built, 2 years before the reference date, and that it's 2,000 square feet, that's why it's getting a lower capitalization rate.
is there a classification anywhere for restaurants in your brief here?
Like a table
Yeah.
amount? No.
That's all my questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Nor do I. Okay. I'll try to spit this out now. Is there a need for summary?
For me? No.
Oh,
I think
sorry.
Rocky's supposed to present.
Oh my God, sorry.
Yes, I'm over here.
Although, if he doesn't want to present, that's fine.
No, no.
Sorry.
No, it's fine, it's happened before, it's like a Freudian slip, you know? It's- Let's hope not.
I think you guys are gonna give me a timeout.
Yeah.
I didn't have coffee, as you can see, and I
Well,
think
neither,
just
you
like,
know what, neither did I, it's bad when you can't have.
I'm obviously not functioning. I apologize. Mr. Newfeld, please proceed with your presentation.
Now, our workup on it was, again, individualized, and we do have a difference of $11,000 in potential rent. We're using a vacancy that's based on market vacancy, and that's on page 4. And what we do here is look at a couple of different rental rates. First of all, at the top of page 4 is a strip rate of 3.9%, and the bottom is a Transcona specific one of 7.7. Now, we would never touch the restaurant rate because, this is by the way, is from the Johnson report, because there is no such thing as a vacancy rate in the restaurants. See, I forgot my copy and I forgot to bring my Johnson book, but the restaurant vacancy isn't made up of investment vacancies, it's made up of restaurants available for sale, which goes back to our early discussion of why our restaurant's so bad, is because at any given point, 5% of them are available for sale. And why are they available for sale? They probably went bankrupt. But we don't rely on that number, so our vacancy is a mean of the strip and the Transcona rate at 5.8%. We are using a much lower number on the structural reserve because this is the sort of property, the restaurant portion is so small, the rest is strip mall. There's very little that you can have a problem with on a strip mall, so therefore our structural reserve is lower. Our non-recoverables the statements indicate a good degree of recovery on it, an over-recovery, which I attribute to an error, but it is what it is. So those two numbers combined, is mathematic error. You didn't put in a minus sign. Okay, I knew there was a problem. Anyway, those two numbers combined are 14,000, which are 3%. Now, the other property was higher, and we say 7% is the norm. In this case, the recovery is 3%, or sorry, non-recoverables are 3%, still higher than what the city's declaring, and we're making a point here. We are using the actuals. There's no such thing as a 2% rate, so this is how we would appraise it. Now, if you'll notice the structural reserve line, should be a minus sign, so the number is wrong. So the NOI should be 436,257. 436,257. So we differ from the assessor by $34,000 or $33,000 on NOI on going through the actuals. And this is fairly close, and we have a mall that's performing as expected, and unlike the last one, and therefore the numbers generally are close. And the differences would be a little bit here, a little bit there, negatives and positives. So as far as capitalization rate, I did not do this workup, and I'm looking at this, and I wouldn't capitalize at 825. Unlike the last property, even though this one is also rearage, but it doesn't possess the negatives that the last one had. The restaurant portion of it is smaller. It's still a poor risk, but it's a smaller percentage of the income. The last one, the restaurant, was the majority of the income, which elevates the risk. This one, it's a lesser part of it, and it's a smaller piece that they can rent out the next day for a coffee shop or something. It's an easier replace one when it goes bankrupt. And we have a saying in the business on this style of restaurant, and I really hate that these things are recorded, because we call them flavor of the month, right? These restaurants that pop up. We don't know if they're just gonna stick around, but they're here now. Anyway, I'm changing my cap rate to 7.75%. This is my opinion. We now do all this work internally, and there's other people doing this, and much like the city has a model maker, but I'm allowed to overrule my model maker whenever I want. Resulting value is $5,629,123, rounded to $5,629,000. And otherwise, the same comments I had before on it. Some summary and all-in-one is that when you use actuals, sometimes your numbers can be higher than the assessors. In some categories, they work, and it's a good investment. Sometimes they're higher, and it's a bad investment. And we're going site-specific here, no question about it. The management expense is a very troubling issue, and I can tell you that the amount of appeals we have at the municipal board are 3 times higher than they have been in the past, and that's very unfortunate. We're not going to resolve it here, obviously, and when it does get resolved, it's going to be a very big issue. We know we're right because we're following the methodology, the Appraisal Institute, the IAAO, every broker who's registered at SEC. We're following the market. We're not making up a valuation, and it's unfortunate the city chose to attempt this concept of just 2% on short notice without enough due diligence. It won't withstand in the long run, and that's not my argument, that's not rhetoric. There's just too much out there. You know, there's cases in going to the U.S. Supreme Court that I get to read all the time. The Appraisal Institute has this legal cases thing, and you have to follow the market. If you have legislation that specifies follow the market, you have legislation that's statutory. Saskatchewan is an example. You follow the SAMA manual. If you follow the market in Winnipeg, you have to do what the market says. So we know that it was a mistake on their part to eliminate 7 down to 2. Thank you, and that's also my closing argument.
Thank you very much. Mr. Taylor, do you have questions, Mr. Newfield?
Yeah, so what did you end up using?
436,257. The 6,600 should have been a negative sign.
6697.
Yeah. You see that? It's a positive and it should have been a negative. Now I have to check the other work here
But
too.
wouldn't that end up being 442,953? You're just deducting basically 6697 off the.
No,
NOI
twice.
you had.
Twice, it was included as a positive, and now it's a negative, so you would take it off twice.
Right. And then the rents you use, you're using slightly below actuals?
No, we're using the actual declared at the 496.
Strange, because I'm getting the Fat Burger, well, if I'm looking at the rent roll, I'm getting $35 for the Fat Burger. You guys got $30.05.
Okay,
And then the 17.
oh, yeah, I probably wouldn't look at that line, that's a work backwards line. If we started with 496, 365, and just, so the other numbers would likely be lower. We were starting with the actual income, and so that's just for display purposes only.
Yeah, so I'm looking at rent roll, and our monthly rent is 641667 times 12 would be 77.
Yeah, no, I agree, you're probably right, but then the other rents would come in lower.
So just ignore everything on the top and
Well,
just go with 496 is what you're saying?
It's there for information purposes and illustration purposes only, and how something should be divided.
And then vacancy again, you're using a market based on the Johnson report, stabilized with strip mall?
Well, this is typically how we'll do it in appraisal. If you have a product that, he segregates the vacancy calculations into neighborhood areas and use types. So both of those are pertinent, because neighborhoods have different vacancies than the whole Winnipeg universe, right? Some neighborhoods perform really, really well.
His Transcona area goes all the way.
But it's smaller than the Winnipeg area. And I don't have my book here, but there's a sub area that'll tell you the square footage. And the other good thing about it is the book has got 30 pages of every vacancy in the city. So then you could go read Transcona and say, why is it so bad? Now, the hearing the other day, I had a Garden City one that popped in at 11%. And we didn't use it because we had the book that we saw that it was like a Sears shutdown. So that it really impacted all of Garden City. And from that, we can derive better, more accurate market examples of vacancies.
Yeah.
And the other thing about strips, then you look at strips and say, well, there's strips all over the place, and how do you get them characterized? And they're all different. So when I in private profession, this is what we generally do, and try to find something that's reasonable. And, if we're doing a car dealer, I'll look at industrial, and I'll look at retail, and I'll look at overall
But
vacancies.
just going back to that, like the Transcona one, that would encompass Cologne Place, which had the same Sears
Yeah, I believe.
partial occupancy by Spirit of Halloween for a couple months.
Yeah, but there's a lot of inventory there, though.
Previously, the Zellers thing, like
Sure.
the Transcona market in the Johnson report for retail is kind of skewed by,
Wow.
like you're talking about everything that's retail in that area.
Which is why we stabilize it with the city rates. It's like, okay, like, let's say you have a shutdown of a large space, and the last shutdown, they said, well, we're gonna keep this store open, and this one we're gonna close, and this one we're gonna keep open, et cetera. And they closed selected stores. How do they decide which ones to close?
And my point is just you
Bad
can't rely on
location.
it, 'cause it's including all that other stuff.
Well, on my page 4.
You said before, you didn't rely on the Garden City one because it included,
Right.
but then this
But-
one you're using, it still included the same
No,
thing.
not in its entirety. Now, take a look at page 4. You can see Garden City was 12.8%. St. James, 10.3%. We knew why those were so high. Now, when you look at Transcona at 7.7, and then St. Vital at 6.9, you knew that they weren't as impacted as, that there was nothing major impact. And I don't have my book here, otherwise I'd tell you what those were.
Yep.
The overall retail was 6.5. And now that's the other thing, so what if you just looked at overall retail, that's a number you can throw in at 6.5, and then you look at the strip number above, and there's the breakdown by use. And you can see there that the strips perform better than the malls. Now, if I recall something you said at the beginning of this, you said it's not really a strip, but we're treating it as such.
I said it's not a neighborhood shopping center, but that's what we're doing, yeah.
Yeah, something
More
like
strip mall.
that. So we have a product that straddles the line between these definitions. You have to look at all of them, and then at the end of the day, pick something that's reasonable. And at a rate of 5.8, we're underneath the overall retail of 6.5.
Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buss.
I see at the end of your brief here, you don't have that information from last time saying that the value of the property was dependent on the mortgage. You don't have that on this one?
Page 25.
Okay. So this is the same thing, you're saying that it's your position that the value of the property is based on the size of the mortgage on the property?
No. When you appraise a property, you look at the market rates and must defend them with the mortgage equity method. The mortgage equity method is a check to see if your selection of rates is intelligent, sane, reasonable.
An after check, yes.
And fits the highest and best use. That's the key here. The problem with, and you go back to the apartment world, when people are reporting sub 5% rates, they are for renovation projects, which is no longer highest and best use as an apartment. The highest and best use is changed to a development project. And in that case, had one applied the mortgage equity, you would say, we can't use those to value in-place income from an apartment. So it's the double check system, and when I was accredited, you had to perform this, and every old-time appraiser were required to do it. Now today, with the investment world, we're rarely seeing it being applied. This has been replaced by discount cash flow analysis as your one that's looking at the money markets. But
I think I understand.
Yeah, in our new appraisals, what we'll actually do is show the income earnings from other types of returns, like bond returns, et cetera, and prove, is there an adequate spread between real estate and those markets?
That's all my questions, thanks.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
I have no questions either. Okay, let's try this again now. Would you like to summarize?
I'm good. Thank
Okay.
you.
I did mine already.
I know, okay, thanks. Okay. All right, the next matter on the docket is 1570 Regent Avenue West.
Okay, I'll get back. Yeah, see you later.
Could you please state your name? And do you first tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, 1570.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Please proceed when you're ready.
Okay. So 1570 Regent Avenue West, the file number is 19-2853, the roll number is 0900760100, proposed 2020 assessed value is $63,792,000. We have 13 different buildings on site, 27 different rental units today, ranges in year built from 1966 up to 2006. So we got lots of stuff going on here. Leasable area being 230,536 square feet. We have the subject property leases in the compliance with request for income information on pages 2 and 3. Just again, going over a lot of different items there. Then run to comparables again, trying to stay in the area, and I try to throw in a bunch of different rental comparables. We're looking at a lot of stuff on the subject property in itself. Sorry. Ease in mind, it's easier just to go to page 12. My brief. All separated in the way that the owner wanted. It's just easier if you look at it this way. So that's what we're looking at, the area that's bordered in purple. I mean, you have the Best Buy store, lots of big box retail. You also have some pad sites along the front, along the strip mall. So you have some restaurants in there as well that we saw in the subject property leases. You also have the gas bar. It'll have its own income stream that we'll go back to in a second. That serves the parcel, I guess, to the south of it for the superstore. It's a superstore gas bar, or I guess now it's SO. Yeah. Flipped it over. But anyways, just to kind of familiarize everyone with it, because I think everyone probably has been to something in there, because there's enough stuff going on there. But anyways, so flipping back to my page 8, I believe it should be the same for you guys. Line for the gas kiosk there. So with that, for the kiosk, we used 364 square feet, the model rent again, and then standard parameters for gas kiosks, 2%, and then $6 for shortfall, and the cap rate is 6.15. And then the additional billing value is just for the equipment, nothing out of the ordinary here, really. Then flipping backwards to pages 6 and 7, we get all those different spaces. Again, we have a lot of a mixture of space. We have restaurants, we have bank credit unions, we have larger format retail in here also. All the rents are model driven, and standard parameters, 4% for vacancy, $8 shortfall, and a capitalization rate today of 6.45%. So flipping over to page 9, you see the combined amounts. I mean, really, to blend stuff together for, you know, the little gas kiosk doesn't really make too much sense, but that's just there for information purposes if you want to take a look at it. And the cap rate applied to the neighborhood shopping center that you saw on page 7. We're looking at page 10 here. I'm sure we'll go over it. It does fall outside of the 20th negative percentile, suggesting that this is a better than average neighborhood shopping center. Which I'm not in disagreement with. But yeah, that's just to go over that. Pages 12 through, goes on for a long time, just has the rent roll income expense questionnaire for the subject property. That's my presentation, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reimer, do you have questions for Mr. Taylor?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Taylor, on page 7, I've included it as well, but I am curious, what's the additional building value of $158,000? Because this isn't the gas bar, this is on the main roll.
This is on the main roll.
Yeah.
And I cannot tell you, I made a note for myself to figure out where that was linked to,
Okay.
and did not have time to go back and look it up, to be honest.
Okay, so we're not sure what that is, but we can agree that is not part of this pumps, tanks, canopies adjustment for the gas kiosk, which has its own number, right?
I don't believe so, but it could be something as simple as, cause it's just a linking button for the, those building values. So it might have linked it to the wrong income stream, so it might be that the gas pumps values altogether are slightly higher, as the numbers do appear a bit low on their own.
Okay, but you don't have the information.
I don't have the information, I'm just
Alright.
trying to figure
Yep.
out why. it would-
Fair enough, fair enough. All right, so turning briefly to your page 6 then. And you've alluded to this, we can agree that the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the top 5 units, these are the mid-box, I'm not gonna call them big box because they're not that large, but they're the mid-box retail units, correct? Like the Best Buys and such?
That's by Michael's.
Yeah, and further down then, I guess that's the 9th entry, that's also a mid-box, that just 19,000, okay. And they then form obviously a significant component of the shopping center, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the department's applied the 2% for an expense allowance, but the department, you can agree that in previous assessments, there was an additional 5% allowance that was applied to the effective gross income, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Now, with respect to you haven't alluded to it, Mr. Taylor, but on your page 42, there's some capitalization rate information there. You haven't referred to it. Are you in any way relying on this information?
Well, this information supports, it's just supporting documentation.
Okay, so
if
there's-
it's included, so if you wanna ask me questions, I'm
Well,
open to answer your
that's,
questions.
were you aware that 2140 McPhillips was a non-norm, it was a transaction between related parties? I guess that would be my first question then.
Nope.
Okay. Were you aware that 3166 Portage and 3670 Roblin, those properties, they both traded on May 7th, 17th, and were part of a much larger transaction that was worth $19 million over, I think it was 14 properties?
I believe a previous appellant that we heard from today said something similar, but I've never, I looked into that one, cause I
Yeah.
made that comment
Yeah.
at a previous hearing, and I could not find, the evidence to
Fair
corroborate what he's saying.
Fair enough, I'll present that evidence for us both then.
Great.
Okay. So to be clear then though, then going back to, and let's just go to your page 9, that's probably the simplest thing. So we can agree, finally, these are all model-driven parameters then, correct?
Everything, yep.
Okay, and we can agree though that this is, notwithstanding that the model has kicked out a different set of parameters for the gas bar, we can agree that this is one economic unit, correct?
That's
Thanks, Madam Chair, those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Buss?
Is the Mark's Work Warehouse in one of these,
Yep. Yeah, I believe it's the one that's just 1 square foot under 220,000. It's $19,999.
Okay. And this is on page 6, so the first two, the difference in rent there, that's basically the size, like 21,000 feet is $15.38, and 25,000 feet is $20.91, is that mostly driven by the size?
Well, I
of the difference in
believe the
size?
25,104 is the Michael's space, and I believe, so it's on its own, separate from the other medium box retails, I'm Kerry was calling it. And I believe it's newer than the other ones.
Okay. And so the overall cap rate that you've used, which is on page
7, I believe. Oh, unless you're looking at it blended.
well, the 644, I guess, is
Yeah.
what it comes out to. How would that fit into your charts here? Retail?
Yeah,
What are
I
we
mean,
calling this? Is the
Neighborhood shopping center, yeah. So, again, it would fall outside of the 20th percentile. As I kind of spoke to earlier, suggesting it's better than average. Neighborhood shopping center.
Oh, okay. Thank you, that's my questions.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Nor do I. Mr. Armstrong?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to preface this just with a couple of brief comments. What I'm suggesting, Madam Chair, is that there's a couple of core issues that involve all the properties. So with your permission, I'd suggest that I would go through the non-recovered expense study not in great detail, because I know you've all heard it many times, but go through it at a higher level one time with this property, and also with the retail cap rate and the rebuttal to the department's cap rate information. So if that makes sense to you, then that's what I propose.
Absolutely, thank you.
So with respect to the subject, now what Mr. Taylor's indicated is if you recall, the cap rate applied by the model for the subject was actually lower than the 20th percentile, presumably based on the assumption this is a better than average quality. I'm going to suggest to you certainly very well located, certainly a good mall, higher risk. And recall my question about the mid-box, and this is going to come forward in our capitalization rate, or our capitalization rate study. Mid-box retailing was particularly high risk and increasingly seemed to be that because of several mergers, because of bankruptcies, because of all kinds of things going on. So notwithstanding, I think what the model appeared to be assuming is this property is driving pretty decent rents, it's well located as far as location factors and therefore lower risk. No. Agreeing it's good location, very good location, agreeing it's good quality as far as the property itself, but certainly as far as a risk factor, it is, I'm going to suggest, very seriously impacted by the presence of several mid-box retailers making up a very significant component of the subject, and therefore the cap rate we're suggesting that you'll see is actually still under the 20th percentile, but certainly suggesting it should be no less, for reasons I'll give, than 7%. Further suggesting that that same cap rate should be applied to the gas bar operation. So what I'm going to ask the board to do, if the board and Mr. Taylor could keep Mr. Taylor's brief on page 9 open, and then turn initially to our page 23, because this will give you a sense of how the discussion will be framed as far as the differences in the evaluation that we're suggesting. So if you look at the department's potential rent, now we've broken it out into 4 streams, but don't worry about that, just look at our total column and the assessor's total column. The potential rent that the assessor's got is $4,422,641. We're actually $170,000 higher at $4,593,356. So we're clearly not debating the market rents that the models apply, and in fact we're applying, based on the performance of the property, we're applying the premium rents that are being generated that results in an annual potential net market rent that's significantly higher than the model. Our overall vacancy, we're suggesting for all the income streams, including the gas bar, is 4%. That's very close. There's a slight discrepancy because the department's model has kicked out a separate income stream for the gas bar, so very, very close, but slightly higher. One of the fundamental issues, of course, relates to the non-recoverable. The department's applied 2%. We're suggesting the continued application of 5% plus the 2% for structural, for a total expense ratio of 7%. Then, though, what happens in this particular property when you take all of those sort of differences in evaluations, if you look at the NOI, we are actually exceptionally close. The department's NOI, using their methodology, is $4,088,747. Ours is slightly lower, but not by a lot. It's $4,027,797. So, notwithstanding that the methodology is very different, the actual NOI that is ultimately derived for the property is actually remarkably close. Fundamentally, and sorry, just taking a half step back, I'm not disagreeing, notwithstanding the, I guess, question and a little bit of a concern I've got about the sort of phantom adjustment on the CSC component. I'm just including them both. I'm assuming they're there for a reason. So both with the gas bar adjustment and that further $158,000 adjustment, I don't disagree with that in this case. But the fundamental difference in this property relates to cap rate, and as you can see on our page 23, we're suggesting a cap rate of 7% in this case for all income streams. So with that in mind then, if I could ask the board initially then on our evidence in chief to turn to page 10. So the submission I'm going to make before this board this morning concerning the retail cap rates There's several points that we make, but one of them fundamentally, and it impacts this property more than some of the others, relates to the elevated risk for the mid-box retail. And if you'll see in our page 10 on the rent roll, we've got the first 6 tenants there that represent a very significant component are those kind of mid-box retail. You've got Mr. Bussett asked about the Markswork Warehouse, they're in Unit 6. Ashley Furniture, 24,777 feet. Best Buy, 33,000 feet. Home Outfitters, about 40,000. Sport Check at 21,500, and Michael's at 25,000. So that, all of that mid-box, all of those mid-box stores clearly represent a very, very significant component of the mall, and in my submission represents the elevated risk that would certainly dictate that a 7% cap rate should be used. So again, I'm not going to belabor more of it because our potential rent is actually higher than the department, so I will move through that. If we then turn to page 12, and this is a subset of the capitalization rate study that we will be presenting in evidence. So the department's applied 6.45% to everything except the gas bar. We're suggesting a rate of no less than 7% this morning. As you'll see, it's certainly well within the range of indicated rates that is in our cap rate study. But, and this is what I alluded to, the vast majority of the space in the mall is to mid-box retailers who do represent in our submission a higher risk in the retail sector. The mall, this mall, if you recall, had already been significantly affected by the vacancy created by Future Shop after Best Buy and Future Shop had merged, and Future Shop left their 25,000 square foot unit in 2013. That unit was finally leased roughly 2 years later in July of 15, but there were other serious warning signs associated with 2 of the remaining big box retail tenants in the mall. In July of 14, HBC Hudson Bay announced the closure of 2 Home Outfitter locations. These locations were not in Winnipeg at that time, but there were very troubling signs that the retailer was pursuing a change in the brick and mortar operations. The news article that we've attached to these materials indicates that more products by Home Outfitters will be offered online, and what the HBC spokesperson said, we have committed to rationalizing our real estate portfolio and creating a strong, streamlined store base along with an expanded digital offering. Those are buzzwords for we're going to downsize our footprint and we're going to increase our online offering, and this is entirely consistent with the trend in the retail industry that certainly was very pronounced and has just been increasing since then. So also, as we, point number 3 on page 12, as we demonstrate in the retail cap rate study, there were other mid-box retailers that were either downsizing or exiting the market altogether, including Sport Check. If you recall, Sport Check Sportmart merged, and so they would represent another tenant that was in our submission as certainly at high risk. So based upon those risk factors, we're suggesting a 7% rate, capitalization rate. So on page 13 then, this is the, and ask the board and Mr. Taylor don't get too hung up on the way we split the income, because at the end of the day, the areas and the income are very close. But we've included on page 13 our valuation for just what we're considering to be the main CSC component, including that adjustment of $157,000. Then moving on, actually because of the nature, because of the basically the nature of the case in this case, I will then just go back to our page 23. And so what we're asking this board, Madam Chair, this morning is to, and of course we've included the 5% non-recoverable allowance in our calculations. We're asking the board to restore the 5% non-recoverable allowance for the reasons I'll get to in a couple of minutes. We're asking this board to apply our higher potential net market income of $4,593,356, but we're asking that the application of that higher income based on the performance be included with a 4% vacancy allowance across the board for everything, including the gas bar, the total non-recoverable expense allowance of 7% rather than 2%, and the capitalization rate fundamentally at 7% rather than the 6.45% and 6.15% that the department's applied. Then running that through with our NOI, it comes in at a total valuation of $57,539,955, adding in those adjustments for that I referred to earlier for the gas bar and on the main roll. We come in at a total requested value this morning of $57,880,000. So on the, perhaps we can start then with the non-recoverable expense study. This is the large document here. So I promised you, Madam Chair of this board, and Mr. Taylor, that I'd go through it at a higher level, because I know we've been through it many times before, so I'm gonna highlight the main concepts and then go from there. Page 1 of our study, and this is fundamentally the crux of the issue. In the middle of page 1, we say what the nature of this allowance is not. It's not an expense relating to standard management fees charged by the owner or third-party property manager relating to the day-to-day operations. We have no dispute that those are actually recovered. And they've always been recovered. Nothing has changed in the past 30 years under a triple net lease. The management fees are typically recovered. What we're suggesting this allowance is in this next paragraph, a stabilized expense involving a number of typical non-recoverable expenses related to the proper and competent operation of the property. Those expenses are virtually never recovered from the tenants under any circumstances. That concept, moving down just a little bit further, that concept is very, very bluntly and clearly stated in the assessor's own valuation procedures manuals between the late 90s and early 2000s, and more recently up until, up until the 2020 assessment. Non-recoverable operating expenses, that was the heading in the manual, and it says management, quote-unquote management. Even with net leases and competent management, there still will be expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from the tenants. Examples of these are processing payments and chasing bad debts, and in our respectful submission, one of the fundamental components of those non-recoverables that arises with the competent management is leasing commissions, and that's a fundamental part of our study. So that, as far as the concept behind the allowance, is what we're suggesting it relates to, and it has always intended to relate to. Now, on page 2, again, we've got similar quotes from the manuals, and they're all attached to these materials, talking about management expenses incurred by the landlord that are non-recoverable from the tenants. Then moving on to page 3, under this heading B, valuation principles. If you look at the appraisal text, the appraisers, and Mr. Neufeld had mentioned this as well, the appraisal principle certainly does support the inclusion of the non-recoverable. And towards the third last paragraph on page 3, the appraiser should account for non-recoverable expenses. The most important non-recoverable cost items to be aware of are space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements and leasing costs, and that's the key for our study, is the leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. The other cost associated with leasing spaces, leasing fees, or commissions. So that certainly, our position is well supported by, we suggest, the appraisal methodology and appraisal tests as well. Then moving on to page, again, similar concepts on page 4. On pages 5 through, and again, I'm going to skip over this because I know you've heard it. Pages 5 through 7, there's examples from Saskatchewan, the SAMA manual, and Ontario, the impact manual, talking about the non-recoverable expenses and how one must account for them. Then moving on to page 8, you'll see that there are a number, certainly in our detailed review, there's a number of non-recoverable expenses that arise consistently with the income statements or the operating statements, as I should say, for the properties. They include leasing commissions, TIs, tenant improvement allowance, free rent, marketing and advertising, bank service charges, mortgage interest, bad debt, professional fees, owner building maintenance, asset management fees, different kinds of financing fees like covenant fees, depreciation and utilities. So all of those arose very, very regularly. But then if you turn to page 9, of all those categories of non-recoverables, there are only 4 that we've considered. The rest of them we have not considered either because they're already included. For instance, the bad debts and our vacancy allowance. Our vacancy allowance presumes both the vacancy itself, but also the bad debts that arise. That's all part of that same allowance. Similarly, for shortfall costs, that's already accounted in our shortfall rate. So there's a number of items that we haven't included, and of course depreciation, that's not included in any of these valuations or appraisals. So that's not part of the data that we've compiled. But on page 9, we do have 4 categories that we have included, the largest of which is leasing commissions. Then you've got professional fees, asset management fees, and advertising marketing. So those are the categories that we've included. Then if we turn to page 10A, the next page with the chart, what you can see there, and that we've added one column just for the board's reference where tenant improvement or tenant inducements are included. I put that there for the board's reference, but certainly don't place any weight on it. We've just put that there in case the board is interested as to the effect of the TIs. The crux of our submission is this second column from the right, which is this 3-year average of the effective gross income without any TIs whatsoever, without the TIs, without the free rent. As you can see, it ranges from a low of 2.77 up to a high of 31.05% based on that 3-year average, with, at the bottom of the page, the average of all the properties being 7.42% and the median at 5.75%. So we do certainly believe that the data that we've reviewed in a lot of detail bears out the 5% allowance, and we're suggesting the department had it right and should have continued with that 5% allowance, and to unilaterally move it at this stage is simply not consistent with appraisal methodology or with the demonstrated materials and statistics coming from the operations of the properties. And as far as a brief overview of the structural allowance, which is, we're considering a 2% allowance to be on page 10B, we've got a chart at the bottom of 10B that relates to what amounts to a spot audit for a total of 11 properties. As you can see, the percentages can vary wildly depending on the nature of the capital that's invested in properties, which in turn is dependent on the age of the property and condition of the property. But certainly it would also fully lend support for the 2% allowance that the department is continuing to apply. So in conclusion, we're asking for this board to restore the 5% allowance based on this submission, and ask that the board make orders accordingly. On pages 10D through, I think it's page 19, page 18, that's all the details of the year-by-year calculations that resulted in the chart that I presented earlier, so that's for the board's reference. Pages 19 through 22 are the details of the replacement reserve review that we had done, and from pages 22 onward is all the materials that relate to the quotes that we've placed in the text of our brief, including the assessor's manuals over the years that do in fact indicate the 5% allowance was there and was in place in spite of the fact that the leases in place were triple net leases. And again, I stress fundamentally, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed in the 30 years since these manuals were published. What has changed is what I believe is a fundamental error on the part of the assessors to what the allowance was actually intended to be in the first place. So that's the non-recoverable. Now, with respect to the capitalization rate, if I could ask the board and Mr. Taylor to refer to our capitalization rate study. So, on page 1 of our capitalization rate study, we talk about fundamentally what's associated with or what's included in a capitalization rate in the second paragraph. The cap rate's influenced by 3 items: the perceived risk associated with the investment's income capacity, investor expectations for appreciation, and the required returns in other investment vehicles like stocks or bonds. And certainly a significant part of the capitalization rate analysis, then turning to page 2, and this was alluded to earlier, a significant part in the cap rate analysis relates to the cost of money and of course leverage on these properties. And as the cost of money is increasing, the capitalization rates by definition will also increase, because it's going to cost an investor more to cover the mortgage obligations that they've got for the property. And interestingly, for the first time in quite a period of time, the middle chart, you can see that the Bank of Canada's benchmark interest rate had actually gone up 75 basis points between April of 16, which was the previous reference date, and April of 18. So that was certainly a reversible of a trend where it was either flat or declining to very, very low levels. Now it's gone up by 75 basis points over the 2-year period. And lower down, predictably, the 5-year mortgage rates had increased in that same period from 2.39% to 2.99% in that 2-year period, an increase of 60 basis points. So we're suggesting then on page 3 that cap rates in Winnipeg will have ceased compression by the reference date, certainly, for the first time since the 2008 financial crisis that hit the markets. If you look at the chart, and we're not relying on it, but just by way of, again, further information as to what the brokers are saying on the chart in the middle of page 3, you can see that for retail properties, it's either typically zero compression between Q1 of 16 and Q1 of 18, or actually an increase in one case. So certainly lends support to the suggestion we're making. Then if you, on bottom of page 3, we talk about some of the sort of the retail economic climate that these properties are being valued in. And on the last paragraph, we talk about the fact that RioCan, which is Canada's largest retail REIT, announced the sale of 100 properties, and it was a very interesting article. The Toronto Star, turning to page 4, what they reported was one of the commentaries on the Colliers International on that sale states, if guidance for the future for retail in Canada is to be taken from this change in direction for RioCan, it may be that retail as an asset class is a questionable focus. Even RioCan's move towards a more diversified portfolio that will include residential. And next, they go on to say, in essence, RioCan is moving away from retail as a focus and is now looking to become entrenched in the type of live, work, play, lifestyle centers that have been topical over the past number of years, not the least of which because of the potential headwinds that retail may face. And then moving down, there's a Bloomberg article that we've also included that really talks about some of the difficulties or some, I guess, some of the overall climate with the retail properties. The second last paragraph, one of the heads of investment states, there's probably more to come. I'm sorry to say, but if you look at the picture for overall retail, it's not good at all. Brick and mortar retailers may be at a watershed moment as plunging market share and store traffic force fundamental changes to a 100-year-old model, and that model, of course, including significant retail sticks and bricks footprints, and that's a model that certainly was proving to be a model that was subject, in order to survive in the retail environment. There was more and more business models focusing obviously on online and sales channels that were not involving the bricks and mortar operations, and that was, as you'll see, also certainly very pronounced in Canada with some other closures. So on page 5, we talk about some of the significant changes in the retail landscape. At paragraph A, we talk about Sears, of course, the closures that resulted in a vacancy in Winnipeg alone of 641,000 feet. Toys R Us went bankrupt. Now, this was an interesting, of course, scenario because Toys R Us went bankrupt, but the Canadian chain was attempting, obviously, to continue on and sever the ties with the American chain as they went into bankruptcy proceedings. But certainly, again, with that, with the American company going bankrupt, certainly indicate a higher level of risk. The Canadian grocery industry, and we've heard lots about this, continued to reduce its brick and mortar stores, and that was again reinforced by Amazon.com acquiring Whole Foods in mid-2017, which is going to have a further impact on that market, and specifically the retail footprint. At the top of page 6, there's Michael Medine, Sobeys CEO, stated that Sobeys must become a strong participant in e-commerce, including both home delivery and the click and collect model. The Globe and Mail went on to say the grocery landscape is expected to change dramatically in the coming years following Amazon's announcements this month that it will swallow Whole Foods, giving Amazon a stronger foothold in the higher margin fresh food category and threatening to eat away at the incoming grocer's bottom line. Now Mr. Medine has to contend with new digital menaces as he works to get the basics working right and slim down staff and operations while facing competitors that are rushing to beef up their e-commerce. And 4 months later, predictably, they announced another 800 jobs would be cut. And of course, all of this was happening after the closures of several locations by Sobeys. They had recently announced the closure of 50 stores in the summer of 2014, including 3 in Winnipeg and another 3 in rural Manitoba. Moving on then to page 7, we talk about some of the other retailers that were having some difficulties, and some of which failed altogether. Obviously, Target, and they just abruptly exited the market in 2015. One of the items I mentioned earlier, Future Shop, after the merger with Best Buy, Future Shop closed 2 locations in Winnipeg, one of them being in this property actually, and those closures and that merger certainly again demonstrated the risk inherent with some of these mid-box retailers going on. Those online retailers resulted in the permanent closures of Grand Employ, Office Depot, and some another 15 Staples locations. And more locally, River City Sports closed its stores at St. Fidel and KP after already closing its historic seasons. So on page 8, there's a number of sort of mid-box and big-box retailers that were in some trouble or closed altogether, and I list them there. You got the Staples and Office Depot, Future Shop, Sport Check, where there were closures, Toys R Us, where the Canadian operations were trying to maintain solvency and stay open, River City Sports, etc., Mex, Laura, Daniel, Jones, and New York. So there were a lot of retailers, these would be more the mid-box retailers that were in some difficulty. So again, I mentioned earlier that the mid-box retailers in this mall certainly are a significant component, and therefore in this environment, we're suggesting that the risk must be reflected in a cap rate that would approach 7%. At the bottom of page 8 and top of page 9, this was actually a local free press article that talks about the mid-box units, and again, I'll summarize this, but they talk about the fact that half a dozen of the mid-box, which is 20 to 50,000 feet outlets, sit empty on major thoroughfares such as Pembina, Regent, and St. James. Most are victims of corporate restructuring, like when you got the Best Buy and Future Shop merging and other similar mergers. And landlords and real estate agents, they go on to say, are finding it a challenge to backfill some of these spaces. Part of the problem is that there's fewer retailers looking for outlets in that size range. With the rising popularity of online shopping, the growing trend is now towards smaller bricks and mortar stores, and that's where fundamentally I'm suggesting in this case that the risk rate should be at a cap rate of no less than 7%. So, in that context, then. On page 12, there's a chart with our capitalization rates, and as you can see there, after taking a look at what the department had presented, and after removing the 3 sales that we had concerns about, the range that the department's got with the 2 remaining sales is between 5.1 and 7.44. Now that's a little bit different range than ours, but actually remarkably consistent. Our range is from 5.92% up to 9.33%. The bulk of the range, or roughly half the range, is north of 7%. And in this case, we're suggesting, with the significant emphasis on the mid-box retailers and the troubles that category in the real estate sector were having, we're suggesting 7% would be very appropriate. The remainder of these materials relate to the articles that have been quoted in the text of our brief, along with the detailed cap rate calculations. Now, the other point, and I'll stress this once now, fundamentally, recall that I've suggested that the 5% non-recoverable allowance should be restored. Our cap rate calculations for each and every one of these properties on page 12 is inclusive of the 5% allowance. The effect, if the 5% allowance is removed, the effect on these cap rates is to increase them by roughly 40 points, between 37 and 40 points. So if this board, and if this board is inclined not to include the 5% non-recoverable allowance, then our cap rates by definition have to be adjusted upward by 40 points, and then my cap rate request in the case of each and every one of these properties would increase by that same 40 points. Because if the board's decision, or ultimately at the end of the day, if the 5% is not included in the expense allowance, then that changes each and every one of these calculations, and again, results in an upward adjustment of, call it 40 basis points. And then, for instance, our request in the case of the subject would be to apply a cap rate of 7.4% rather than 7%. Finally, I've got rebuttal evidence relating to the department's chart of the specific properties. And Kelsey, there's one for each of your files. Okay. And I won't belabor this because Mr. Taylor hadn't gone through that chart in a lot of detail, but I did just want to make the board aware, and I'd alluded to this in questioning. On page 2, or the very first page of the text of these materials, the department's included 2140 McPhillips, and as you can see at the bottom of that page, there's a segment from the questionnaire and question number 3, it asks, was this sale an arm's length open market transaction? The answer is no. If no, was the sale between related parties? And the answer is yes. So certainly I'm suggesting that that capitalization rate should not be given any weight. The other question I had to Mr. Taylor, if you recall, there's 2 properties that I suggested were part of the portfolio purchase, and I'm very, very familiar with this purchase, and that's on page 3. So there's a total of, there's a total of 12 properties there. They were all part of a much larger portfolio transaction. The highlighted ones are the 2 that the departments included. I am familiar with both the vendor and the purchaser, and certainly in this context, given that they were part of a much larger portfolio, we're suggesting that those 2, identifying just those 2, and as part of the cap rate analysis would not be appropriate in this case. And what the IAAO says, at the bottom of page 3, is a multiple parcel sale is a transaction involving more than one parcel of real property. Regardless of whether the parcels are contiguous, any multiple parcel sale that involves multiple economic units generally should not be used in valuation or ratio studies. That's the case here with the 2 properties identified on Portage and Roblin. So with all of that then, our request is to apply our slightly lower net operating income with a capitalization rate of no less than 7%, and if the board chooses to not restore the 5% non-recoverable allowance, then to be consistent with our own methodology and our capital calculations, to increase the capitalization rate to 7.4% and order the reduction accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Taylor, your questions, Mr. Rogers?
Not that many, actually. We've gone over lots of this stuff already before. For my own personal knowledge, 3166 Portage, and Robin, you said you knew the vendor and purchaser?
I do.
Can you disclose those?
No, not in public, but I can certainly discuss them with you in detail in due course.
And then just in your cap rate study, your page 12, you presented and discussed that cap rates are not decreasing, yet your chart on page 12 would suggest that they still are following that trend, if not remaining static. I mean, the lowest ones generally are the newest, and you're seeing the higher 7.5, 7.6, those are in the 14, 15s. You're seeing below those generally after that, correct?
I'm certainly the dates are what they are. I'm suggesting, Mr. Taylor, that if anything, knowing some of those properties like I do, the quality will have an impact.
Okay.
So as much.
But none of these are really comparable to the subject anyways.
That I would agree with as far as the nature of the asset, I would agree with that. But I'd suggest our asset, because of the mid-box, is at an elevated risk.
And then just a question on the rent roll on your page 57. Somehow you have better quality financial documents than I do. So numbers come a little bit clearer. Pages 57, I'm just curious about like NOI and what's really included in these financial statements that you have here. In addition to maybe if you could clarify what the total unrecovered expenses might be. Page 56 seems to indicate that it's really low, like below 2% at 18,707. That's at the bottom of page 56. But again, it seems very complicated.
This is because they're a REIT and they report the way they do. I'm actually gonna suggest, if you go to page 59, for instance, because you recall I sort of suggested that the leasing commissions were a significant component, and if you look towards the bottom of the page, the second and last components there, you can actually see, and TIs, which we're not including, but you can see the leasing commissions, which total.
Like the real estate commission portion?
Yeah, exactly. So the total there is 90,649. That's based on the cash flow, so those are actually leasing commissions paid out. So again, I'm suggesting a stabilized allowance, but the leasing commissions will form a significant part of that. Then, if you look at,
My question was just about the non-recoverables.
well, leasing commissions are not recovered, so.
They're just not including them in that category?
What's that?
They're not including them in that
Well,
category?
that's where they list the actual costs. So if you go back to, and let's, so if you go to page 56. So that's where, if you see the heading about a third of the way down, that's where the non-recoverable expenses start. And then if you turn to the next page, at page 57, under that, you've got the real estate commissions as not recoverable. Like, there's real estate commissions new outside, real estate commissions new inside, renewal override.
Yeah.
So it's those commissions there, which again, I believe are, if you look to, the budget in this case was $90,000. I don't think they actually had any that year, but that's what the budget was, and in previous years, it was, I believe, 20,000. Well, there's some negatives in there, so I can't explain what the negatives are, because it wouldn't make sense that you would actually get real estate commissions back from an agent. So,
Yeah, that's right. I guess just to clarify, like, their reporting statements that they submitted to the department for 2017, at the top of all these pages, it's showing the periods from January 2018 to December 2018.
yeah,
So their year-to-date actual will only be until April 24th, the date at the bottom of the page then, or?
sorry, where,
I'm just trying to clarify, I guess, what the expenses would be, but it's confusing when they put that the period, like, if you're looking at the page here, at the top of the page it says it's for like the entirety of the year. At the bottom,
Yes.
the date that it was authored is in April, so it's really only reflective of 4 months then?
No, I'm thinking that it was, that print date, I cannot explain, but this will be a full year statement.
Okay.
This will be a full year.
Yeah, I'm confused either way.
Yeah.
That's my question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Buss?
Yes, on the cap rate, well, on page 12, we'll start on the, page 12, brief.
Yes, yes.
The average is slightly under 7.
Yes.
A lot of them are under 7. And when I look at the location, and I think back to what you said at the beginning, you said subject property, very well located, but you wouldn't say that about these ones on page 12, would you, most of them?
Oh, I would
If
say
find
there's
page
several
12.
that are very well located. In fact, most of them are well located, absolutely.
Okay, well, I see one on Goulet. Would you say Goulet is equal to,
No. What I would say is, as far as the location on Osborne Street, that area being what it is a good location. Portage Avenue, St. James Street, Ellis Avenue,
these aren't
and,
shopping centers, they're just
well, they're
strip
not.
malls on the side of the street.
I understand, these are, the nature of the asset is different, but, Madam Chair and Mr. Buss, if you recall, I said it was well located, but I also said there's a serious elevation of risk because of the nature of the tenancies here, the mid-box tenancies. So I'm suggesting you can't look at location in isolation, you have to look at the nature of the asset. And when the market is suggesting capitalization rates generally of between 6 and 7.66, let's call it, but you've got a very significant component of mid-box retailers, one of which had already been hit with Future Shop, in your income stream, that elevates the risk in the economic climate we're in. But again, to be clear, Mr. Buss, I'm not suggesting that, I'm agreeing this is a good location, but there's other mitigating factors for sure that elevate the risk.
Okay, and to get back to these mid-sized boxes, they are national companies, whereas the ones that you would find on Goulet or Nairn or Jefferson, they wouldn't be national brands. They would would they?
No, well, not typically, although for instance on St. Mary's Road, you've got what used to be a Robin's Donuts, which at one point was a sort of a national chain. And on, let's see what these other ones are. St. James Street has a national, that's a national furniture place. Phillips. There are a couple of national chains in there. It's not gonna be in the like, to your point, for instance, on Britannica and on Goulet, that's not where the national chains are gonna be. So I would agree with that, but that gets to the very heart of the issue. The national chains are shutting down and closing reducing their retail footprint. So that while the perceived covenant for a national chain historically would be better, it's not being borne out by what's happening with these low-cost retailers.
As a property owner, would you still be wanting national brands as opposed to small?
It
Small
depends, it
stores.
depends entirely who the national brand is and the strength of the covenant in the smaller stores. I would not suggest you could use broad brush strokes with that distinction because, for instance, if you've got Staples as a good example where they have been reported and continuing to be in trouble and they already closed a bunch of stores, so if you have Staples in there, that's fundamentally a retailer that is almost exclusively going to online shopping. That's not a good covenant. If you've got other retailers that have had mergers like it's been well documented on the grocery sector with Sophie's and Safeway to shut things down, well documented with Future Shop, Best Buy. So it really depends on the nature of the retailer, not whether it's national or not. Similarly, if you've got a local retailer that's either very well established or can provide you with a good covenant, that's at least as secure as these national retailers. So there's a lot that goes into it, it's just not just the distinction between national versus local.
Okay. On page 9 of the non-recoverable expenses,
Okay.
you mentioned leasing commissions. I think there's been municipal board decisions saying that leasing commissions shouldn't be used as a reduction.
Let's
And
actually, no, Mr. Buss.
Am I wrong?
So, now, I actually have, Mr. Taylor, are you gonna be filing a rebuttal?
Nope.
Okay. Then I'm going to quote from these municipal board decisions that the department's alluded to. It's not in evidence, Mr. Buss, but since.
well, you can just say that I'm wrong, that they do
No,
allow
no,
leasing
but
commissions.
it's not that simple, so I want to be very clear, and I want to be
Oh, okay.
transparent for both this board and for Mr. Taylor. What the municipal board decisions have said, in virtually, with one exception, what they said in these cases is, it's in situations where the appellant will come in and say, this rent was $15, but they got 2 years free rent, I want to take it down to 13. This rent is $20, but there was 100,000 in TIs, so if you take that out, I want it down to 12. What the municipal board has specifically said, Madam Chair, and this is, Mr. Buss is right on this point, you cannot use an NER, a net effective rent. You shall not use an NER calculation to value the subject. So Mr. Buss, to your question, you're exactly right on that point. But fundamentally, that's not what we're doing. We're not asking this board we're not asking for all the TIs and all the leasing commissions to be taken dollar for dollar. What we're suggesting is, and this is an issue that the municipal board, sorry, I'm gonna take a half step back. After the municipal board has said, you shall not calculate an NER for value, they then went on, again, with one exception, just to actually apply a management, the quote-unquote management fee. Similarly, what we're saying is, we're not asking this board to accept an NER calculation because the municipal board has said you shall not do that. But what we're saying is the 5% unrecovered expense allowance, which is in play, has been in place and should continue, is to account for all of the non-recoverables, leasing commissions, advertising, all these things as a stabilized allowance. In some years it's going to be a lot higher, and the NER, if you calculate it, will be very low. In other years it'll be the non-recoverable expenses will be much lower. So that's the distinction, is we're not coming to this board as those appellants did and saying we want you to accept an NER calculation, but you can't do it. We're suggesting that the 5% as a stabilized allowance is the appropriate methodology, and the department essentially had it right for the last 25 years.
Thank you. That's all my questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
Nor do I.
Thank you all for your time on that. Could I ask that all of that be just carried forward to the rest of, thank you.
Absolutely. Summary?
Nope.
Okay. Nope. All right, perhaps take a 5-minute break. Okay, we'll call this meeting back to order. The next matter on the docket is 1530 Regent Avenue West. Mr. Taylor, please proceed when you're ready.
Okay, 1530 Regent Avenue West, the file number is 19-3272. The roll number is 0900763200. Proposed 2020 valuation is $60,141,000. 2 buildings on site, 18 premises there total. Rest of stuff. Cut to the chase on this one. If we're flipping to my page 5, we're looking at this property as a neighborhood shopping center. We see all the mall-driven rents there for the numerous units on site. Leasable area being 69,338, so the potential gross rent is 1,275,993. Standard parameters for neighborhood shopping center would allow 4% for vacancy loss, 2% for expenses, $8 shortfall, and a cap rate of 7.3%. Again, cut the chase. Mr. Rammer and I quickly chatted over the break. Really, we're only differing on the 5% here, period.
Okay.
I mean, looking at my page 5 compared to his page 9, the differences in rent are negligible, along with everything else, and he's applying the same cap rate as the apartment, so.
So
The question is really just can carry forward based on what we.
So Madam Chair, I think Mr. Davis characterized it exactly right. We're $15,000 on the potential rent, so it's not all that material. So my request would be twofold, if we can have the questions asked and answered on the 5% issue. And then a reminder for the board that if the board chooses to not include the 5%, then my cap rate actually would be increased by that 40 points, because that's how our cap rates are calculated. But Mr. Taylor's framed the issue is exactly right, so if we could ask that all of that discussion be carried forward, I think we can then move on.
Okay, great. Just let me make a note for a minute, please. Okay, Mr. Besser, Mr. McIntyre, did you have any?
No, I have no questions.
No, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next matter is, all the numbers are so close, 1591 Regent Avenue West.
So 1591 Regent Avenue West, file number is 19-3275. Roll number is 0900775140. Proposed 2020 valuation being $9,608,000. Recommendation today to reduce the value to $9,490,000. Based on adjustments to the income as well as a cap rate adjustment.
What was that number in agreement, please?
Is there an agreement? Okay,
$9,490,000.
thank you. Let me just note that, please. To reduce to 9,490,000. And applicant accepts rec, so that was 9,490,000.
And based on what again?
Adjusting the income and the cap a little bit.
Okay. Thank you. is 855 Regent Avenue West. Please proceed.
Right, 855 Region Avenue West is the file number of 19-3416. The roll number is 0901031840. The proposed 2020 value is $2,687,000. One building on site here, 4 units, built in 2006. Recommendation today to reduce the value to $2,367,000. Again, based on the same factors, adjusting income and adjusting cap rate.
Sorry, can you say that number again slower, please?
2,367,000.
And Mr. Reimer? Sorry? Oh.
We're in
Agreement, okay. I should have taken a break earlier. And it was the same reasons, adjustment to income and cap? Okay, the next matter, 1565, is that right? Yes, 1565 Regent.
Okay, so 1565 Regent. The file number is 19-3065. The roll number is 0900774560. The proposed 2020 assessed value is $8,043,000. Recommendation today to reduce the value to $7,540,000. Based on, again, adjusting the income and adjustment to the cap rate.
Okay. Sorry.
7540.
7540.
Yep.
Mr. Reimer?
We're in agreement.
Okay. And the reason?
Adjustment to income and cap again.
Okay, wait. You get that back, it has your sticker on it? Thank you. Okay, I didn't write on it. Okay.
Just need this one.
Oh, okay.
You can keep that.
There you go. Okay, and 1592 Regent Avenue West.
There's no recommendation on this one.
Oh, okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Well, right.
Joking, okay.
Okay, so 1592 Region Avenue West, if everyone's ready. File number is 19-2854. Roll number is 0900776310. Proposed 2020 value is $10,839,000. One building on site, 6 units there, built in 2010. Go over to page 2, we see they're compliant in sending the income and expense questionnaires. Comparables, again, all along, Regent thrown lots of comparables in here, ranging in the high teens to mid $20, $25 range. Page 5 has the valuation for the subject property. See, most units are similar in size, ranging from 5,017 square feet or 12 square feet to 6,510 square feet. All the rents are model driven there, generally in and around all the exact same rates, $24.53, up to $25.07. Again, neighborhood shopping center here, vacancy of 4% supplied, shortfall of $8, expense rate of 2%, and a capitalization rate of 7.15%. So the capitalization rate, I don't believe Mr. Reimer is, I think you're in agreement with the cap, or, but it's mostly just vacancy and, the rental per square foot amounts we're applying, today. So I'll be quick here. Page 8, we just see the, subject property right beside the one we looked at earlier. Just off. Meridian Regent, so facing east. You can see the tenancies there, Ravens, Sleep Country, Children's Central World. After those aerial photographs, we have the same, income and expense questionnaire that was filed for the property, so really lots of the same, information's contained in that, as well as the same addendum that I've included in all my submissions today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reimer, do you have questions?
Yeah, so again, Mr. Chair, this is this is model driven top to bottom, right?
Yep.
And we can agree that prior to this cycle, the 5% would have been included, non-recoverable would have been included in the valuation, correct?
Yep.
Thanks, Madam Chair, those are my questions, and if we can have all the previous stuff carried forward, please.
Absolutely. Mr. Buss?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
No question.
I have no questions, so please proceed with your presentation.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Taylor was exactly right. This is actually part of what's known as the Crossroads Shopping Center, so our client treats it as one economic entity. This property was the very first one that we had heard, all part of the same economic unit. So, if we go initially, please, briefly to my page 7. So, the potential market income that we are calculating, the area layout is exactly the same, but the potential market income we're calculating is actually substantially lower based on the performance of the property as of the reference date. And as you can see there, the rents being achieved ranged from $20 for unit 92.6 up to $24 for units 92.4 and 1592A. Potential rent using that and applying $21 to the vacant unit is $741,988. So that is the potential market income that we have applied in our valuation. Vacancy is another issue in this case. And if you recall my discussion earlier concerning the cap rate, I suggested there was a whole bunch of mid-box to smaller box retail that were going bankrupt and causing some vacancy issues. That's exactly the case here. Unit 92.2 had been vacated by Daniel Leather. They're a national chain who filed for bankruptcy in February 16, and that unit was representing 19.3% of the space was vacant as of the reference date. So based upon that vacancy, notwithstanding that it's 19%, we're suggesting an elevated vacancy rate of 7.5% in this case to reflect that, along with some optimism that the unit would get filled within the short order. Same comments relating to the non-recoverable expense, we're asking that to be restored, the 5%. And based upon those suggestions on page 9, then we've got the potential market income, as you see there, of $741,988, including that vacant unit of 6,500 feet, applying a vacancy allowance of 7.5%, and the 5% for the non-recoverables. Applying the departments, and Mr. Taylor was exactly right, provided that the 5% allowance is restored, we're applying a capitalization rate of 7.15%, which results in a value of $8,645,000 rounded. And again, I'd reiterate, Madam Chair, if the board chooses to not include the 5%, that would impact directly our cap rate request, and we would be asking for something approaching 7.65, which is 40 points higher, and which is again, the equivalent of the 5% calculation that's been included in our capitalization rates. So based upon that, our request this morning is for a value of $8,645,000 for the reasons given. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just quickly a question about previous cycle. Just the vacancy allowance was adjusted then. Did you know what it was adjusted to?
The previous cycle.
Because you included the order, sorry, on page 15.
I do not know that vacancy rate that was included in that order.
Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buss.
One question, when did it go vacant? I think you said it, but.
Yes, indeed. Page, yeah, page 7, please. Under vacancy allowance, Daniel Leather filed for bankruptcy protection in February of 16, and it went dark shortly after that.
Okay, that's all my questions, thanks.
Mr. McIntyre?
And I have no question.
Nor do I.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Great, Thank you very much.
Oh, I have summation.
Oh. Sneaky.
She was gonna ask the question.
Oh, I apologize, I shouldn't have said.
Thank you very much. I will now be closing this hearing this morning. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
You too.